You are attending a webinar by OCS Life Sciences on the topic of the development of an SCTM Define-XML. My name is Lieke Gijsbers. I work for OCS Life Sciences as a clinical programmer and CDISC expert. My colleague, Sofia Vale, who will take the word in a few minutes, is our solution developer and Define-XML specialist. She created a tool that supports the development of Define-XML. And during this webinar, she will give an introduction into Define-XML and will provide you with some insights in this tool. But let's take a look at a few housekeeping notes first. This is a webinar. That means that you can hear us, but we can't hear you. This ensures that all participants can clearly understand our speaker without any disturbances. If you have any questions, we ask that you write them in the chat box, which you will find in the control panel at the right side of your screen. Sofia will answer the questions at the end of the session. I will now give the word to Sofia.
All right. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Thank you so very much for attending this webinar, and thank you, Lieke, for your very kind introduction. My name is Sofia Vale, and I will be presenting today's webinar on this tool that we have created to develop the SCTM Define-XML. For this webinar, I will start by giving a very, very brief introduction on Define-XML, and then I will present how we started with the development of this document and what were the issues that we found on the way, and what did we create to solve those problems, how does our solution work, and finally, what plans do we have for the future of this tool? Define-XML, as Lieke already said, is one of the CDISC standards that is required for data submission to regulatory agencies, such as the FDA, the PMDA, and the EMEA. And it contains all the metadata for all the data sets that are being submitted, be it SAND, SCTM, or ADAM. So it will describe all the data sets in the submission, all the variables, any control terms that we are using, any derivations that we are applying. And all of this is so that it is easier for the reviewer to check the data that we are submitting. Usually, this is submitted with a file with a style sheet so that all the information is in these very nifty tables that you can see on the image on the left to make it easy to read. But the file that's behind, the XML file, is written in XML language, and it can be quite tricky to understand when you are reading it. So you can imagine that creating it fully by hand is a very difficult task. So when we started creating Define-XMLs, we went looking for tools that could help us do this. We found several, but the one that we opted for was the Pinnacle 21 community version. And that's because it is a free tool that we were already using and still use for validation of our submissions. And it's even pretty straightforward, very easy to use, and so it seemed like the logical tool for our job. In a nutshell, what we do is we take the datasets that we want to submit and feed it to Pinnacle 21, which will then create an Excel file, a very well-structured Excel file with the metadata that it could derive from those datasets. And then we as users can provide the rest of the input needed manually, so that we end up with a complete Excel file. So we add all the derivations, the comments that we want to add, code lists, etc. And once we have a complete Excel file, we can feed it again to Pinnacle 21, and it will create us an XML file. So that means we never have to worry about the XML markup language. It's very user-friendly. And we use this tool to create several defined XMLs. And that's how we started noticing that we had some constraints to our work. So, for instance, there was a lot of manual input that we had to do still. So the Excel file that we were getting, we considered it very incomplete. We also started finding some small inaccuracies in the metadata that was being already provided at the beginning by Pinnacle 21. And most importantly, we were limited to what Pinnacle 21 community can do. And for instance, that means that at the moment, using Pinnacle 21 community, we cannot create a defined XML in version 2.1. We can only do it in version 2.0. So we start battling a little bit with this, and our biggest constraint really was, well, we cannot do much about it because this is not our tool, it's someone else's. So what was the solution we found? Well, let's create our own. For that, we started by establishing some goals for our tool. So of course, we have to get at least as much as we were getting before, but we want to reduce our manual input as much as possible. We want the information that is being automated to be 100% reliable. We want a tool that is flexible and customizable to different studies. And of course, we want to keep that user friendliness. So after some trials, what we got to was this, and this is a custom task in SAS Studio, where you can see it has some options. The ones that are required by the user are the ones with the red asterisk, and that's what's the input data sets, where do you want the output to go, what are the versions of the standards that we are using. And one of our very first additions was, do you have a file with your CRF annotations, so that the program can already see, for instance, if a variable is annotated in the CRF and in which page. And that should already and does already save us a lot of time in manual input. What's happening behind the scenes is very easy. The program is taking all of these options. It is taking all the standards metadata that is present in the CDISC library API and some macros with derivations to automate the creation of this metadata. And at the end, it creates an Excel file with the exact same structure as one we were getting from Pinnacle 21, so that we still have compatibility. Very quickly, I will be stopping this slideshow just for a little bit, just so I can show you what it looks like from a user's perspective. So I already have SAS Studio open, and you can see this is what the task looks like. So this is the program. I inputted everything I needed, so I have some SATM datasets. I have an Excel file that's being created. I have my annotations. I have everything, and then just clicking run. To make sure that nothing went wrong, I already ran this, and you can see that I have results. And all of this is the tables that are being output to the Excel file, which I believe, yes, I already have it here open. It's the Excel file that I created shortly ago. And for those of you that are familiar with Pinnacle 21 community, you will recognize the structure, but in case not all of us are familiar, you can see that we have the study level metadata, we have all the data set level metadata, all of the variable level as well. And we also have value level, so for specific groups. And all of this is automated. I didn't change anything so far. Then we have some other sheets that are related to these. So for instance, the where clauses here are all described in this one. We have all the code lists, external dictionaries that might be being used, some methods, some comments, and finally the document properties, and this would be your annotated CRF and your study data reviewer's guide. All right. You can see that we have a lot, but I want to show you just how much we have gone from our first steps into Define-XML and where we are now. So I'm going to go back to my slideshow. There we go. And here we have just a screenshot of what I showed you just now. And the first thing I would like to tell you about this is the colors, because especially for those who have seen files like this before, the colors are probably new. And the colors are how the program interacts with the user. So if you see a cell that is highlighted in pink, that's the program telling you, I know this cell must be filled, but I don't know what to write there. So you will have to do that manually. So it already warns you if there's any manual input that you must provide. Those that are in golden yellow is a program saying, I have derived information for this cell, but I cannot be sure that is 100% accurate. So please review this information. There are some instances where this might happen. One of them is with those CRF annotations, and I grabbed an example that's not exactly linked to the rest of the metadata that you are seeing here, but it's a very good example to show you one of the issues that an automated tool might find in an annotation. So the annotation that we have here is for COVAL in CO comments, but it actually is referring three different variables. It's referring COVAL, IDVAR, and CMLink ID. Looking at it, we know that, for instance, CMLink ID is definitely not actually annotated there. It's just a string, but the program has not achieved that level of intelligence yet. So it will add this annotation to CMLink ID, and it will also add it to IDVAR. And IDVAR is not specific for the comments domain. It might show up, for instance, in supplemental qualifiers domains. So if you have, let's say, sub AE, you will have an IDVAR, and the page where this annotation is going to be added to IDVAR in sub AE. Unfortunately, I haven't trained the tool to a level where it understands not to do this. Maybe someday I will, but for now it is something that we still have to review. However, just having the pages there already saves us quite a lot of time, so we decided to just keep it with all the false positives there. All right, so just to give you some examples, at variable level, for instance, this is the output that we get with Pinnacle 21 community, and it's already quite a lot of information. With our tool, you can already see there's more. And this was really our main objective, is getting as much as possible. So for instance, all of these columns now can have information there. So the code list and the origins, etc., you can already derive it for many, many variables. Another thing that we also decided to do was to give it some more specificity in terms of data types. So for instance, a DTC variable, that's a datetime variable. It is a datetime type, but Define-XML allows us to have be a bit more specific about what type of datetime it is. So in this specific instance, our program can look at VSTTC if you have data there and see that, okay, you don't have a time component. So this is most likely a date type and not a datetime. And it will also add the format. In this case, it's ISO 8601, like all date variables for SCTM. And that way we have a lot of information that's already automated, and this saves us a lot of time. Then value level, for instance, is something that Pinnacle 21 does not derive. So this is something we had to do manually. And you can imagine if we have a lot of data sets, this ends up being a very long process. Our program will derive value level metadata for findings domain, for supplemental qualifiers, and for TS. And it will add already your data type, your lengths, and specifically for the supplemental qualifiers, it can also add the origin. And this is because in the supplemental qualifier dataset, we have one variable called QORIG that tells you the origin of that qualifier. So it's very easy to just copy it here and ensure that we have consistency between our data and metadata. Just one more example is the code lists. That's another thing that with Pinnacle 21 community we didn't have access to, and we had to do everything manually. What we decided was that based on the standards metadata, we can see if a variable is subjected to control terminology. And then based on the data that's being provided in the dataset, we can take the code list and we can add the NCI codes and we can add the coded values when needed and just have already a lot of this information provided automatically. As for the rest of the metadata, I don't have more images for you, but I do have a quick list of everything else. So for study level and dataset level, we get the same information as Pinnacle 21. Pinnacle 21 community was already very, very complete at these levels. So that means that we can get the study name, we can get the standards versions. For the datasets, we can get the class, the structure, and the key variables. Then for the methods and comments, this is more that we didn't get before, and we decided to integrate some into the program. So methods for usage ID, for sequence numbers, baseline flags, and study day variables, because these we always derive the same way. And then some comments for unscheduled visits, R domain, IDVAR, and IDVAR val. And this is because we were doing a lot of Define-XMLs for a lot of related studies, and we wanted to ensure consistency across all of those studies. So this way, we always get the same thing. Finally, the last two, we have the documents metadata. So as I said, the annotated CRF and the SDRG, and those you can toggle on the program options. So you can say that you want those documents to show up or not. And for the dictionaries, well, based on the standards metadata and the dictionaries that you point out in TS, the program can derive all the metadata for those except for the version. That one it doesn't have access to. So for MEDRA, WHO drug, the ISO country codes, and others like UNI and SNOMED. And this is pretty much everything that we can get with this tool right now. But as good developers that we are, we decided not to stop there, and we start thinking, okay, we have a tool for the development of SCTM Define-XML. What more can we do? And the first thing that came to our attention was we were also creating ADAM datasets, and we were going to need a Define-XML for those ADAMs. So we created a very similar tool, but for ADAM. I marked here as a work in progress simply because it is not currently using the CDISC library API, but the external Excel files that we can save locally, which means it works 100%. It's just not at the level that our SCTM tool is. We also saw that we were saving a lot of time in the development of Define-XML, but we still had to validate all of these. So we created a validation program as well. This validation program was created to complement the validation checks that we were already doing using Pinnacle 21 community, and based on how we were already deriving these. So it will look at your key variables, it will check the data type and lengths, it will check variable roles, it will check your CRF annotations to check if a variable is annotated in CRF or not. And in the end, it creates a very nice table with all the messages that were derived by the program. And this table is also output in Excel so that we can work with it very easily. And the goal is just to go through these messages. There might be a lot, but most of them is actually just to do a manual check to be sure that information is correct. And with this, we know that all of these topics are validated. All right. So what more do we have in store for these programs? I'm going to present you a very short list of just ideas that I have. Of course, this is not an exhaustive one, and we are always open for more ideas and more feedback. So the first thing that I would like to do is to have one task that can control all of these programs. I just show you that we have programs for development and validation, for SCTM, and for ADAM. They share a lot of common derivations, but they are all separate. So the maintenance, it ends up being a tedious process. If I change it in one, I might have to change in all four if it's a common derivation. Having it all under the same umbrella would make it a lot easier to maintain. Another thing that we are thinking of is how to insert custom methods and comments. So we want it to be more flexible and more customizable. The comments and methods that we now have are inside the program, so they're not so easy to modify. We have to do it manually. And if we could customize this, it will make it much easier to control what we had and to add even more. Finally, we would like to no longer depend on Pinnacle 21 community to create the Define-XML file. And by this, I mean, once we have our Excel file complete, we still run it through Pinnacle 21 community to get the actual XML file right now. But it would be great to be able to have that independence so that that we can go past the limited configurations that we have in Pinnacle 21 community. So for instance, the Define-XML version 2.1. But also, and this is my last point, because we want to at some point create analysis results metadata. And this is one of the configurations that Pinnacle 21 community does not support at the moment. So having that independence would open the doors for us to get to ARM. And this is my very, very short list. In summary, we have already come a very long way, but we still have a lot more to explore and a lot more that we can do. We are very, very proud that with each step that we take, we get closer to a flexible, user-friendly, and automated tool. This is all I had to say today. I hope you have enjoyed it. and I would like to thank you very much for your attention. I am happy to answer any questions that you have, so I'm going to give the word back to Lika, who hopefully collected some questions from the chat box. Lika?
Yes, thank you, Sofia. That was excellent. And we already received some questions, but may I please remind the attendees that if you have any questions, that you can write them in the chat box in the control panel at the right side of your screen. So Sofia, yes, let's take a look at question number 1. Yeah, so you did this for SCTM and Adam. And then there was a question, could you also use this tool for the creation of a scent defining XML? So for scent datasets.
Yes, definitely. It's not done yet, but with just some small changes, it should be 100% possible.
Okay, great. I think that answers the question. Then the next one, you did this in SAS Studio, but can it also be used in any other software?
The actual task file, I believe, is SAS Studio specific, but it's just some small changes to use, for instance, an Excel file for those options instead, and then we can use it in any SAS software. So again, it should be easy to do.
Okay. Okay, next one then. How much time has this saved you in the actual development and potentially also validation of this SCTM defining XML?
Okay, I'm going to have to do some calculations in my head very quickly, but it saved us, if I remember correctly, we started having to spend about 1/3 of the time we were spending before. So it saves about 66% of the time we needed before with all that manual input. Now it's just a question of a few hours and you have everything. Also depending on how big your study is and how many you want to create, of course. And this goes both for development and validation. Both of them was a lot of time saved there.
Okay. Then the next one, it seems that you're building the define from the datasets. Did you consider to start with the define and then build the datasets based on the definitions?
That is possible. This is done like this because of the workflow that we were using when we needed this tool. So that workflow was based in having Pinnacle 21 community as our tool, and that required us to already have the data set. So we were creating it at the end. But it's also possible, of course, to first create the metadata and then use all of that to create your data sets.
Yes. Then the next question, how do you ensure that the variable length in the define XML stays the planned length? In the submission datasets itself, length need to be the actual length.
The way
so
that we are, yeah, how do I ensure the length? So because we are doing this after we have the data sets, if the data doesn't change, then we can be sure that the length we have is the maximum length. The program actually determines what's the maximum length for the values you have there. If you added a data set that has values for a variable that are only 5 characters long, but the variable itself has a length of 200, the define XML will show a length of 5. It will derive it based on the data itself, if you have data there. Of course, if we're doing this before you have data, it is trickier, but then you can also use the validation program that we have to just double check that you still have the correct length in your define XML once you have your data sets complete. Does that answer the question? I
guess so. I would assume that it answers the question. Okay, then there's a next question about value level metadata. The question is, would you create value level for both LB ORES and LB stress C, and the same for ORES and stress C in any other domains, or only the one of the two in your automatic derivation?
So that's something that was not on my list for the future, but it is on my master list for the future, is that you can define if you want it just for auras, or if you want it just for stress C, or if you want for both, or even also stress N. So give it the more flexibility there. Right now, I believe it will create for auras, and if it sees that stress C is different, then also for stress C.
Okay, that's clear.
Okay.
Then a question about Define-XML code list step.
Mm-hmm.
In the Define-XML code list step, you have to list all the options that are present on the CRF, even if they do not occur in the data. How do you handle this in your system?
Well, ideally, we would have all those code lists already, so we would have an electronic CRF. What we use this for, our CRFs were actually paper CRFs, so it was impossible to get that entire code list, which means that right now we still have to do that manually. So if you see a variable that comes from the CRF and it's a text variable, then you have to check if the code list exists or not, and if it has all the values that are in the CRF yourself. The program can only go so far as to see that maybe you might need more values on a code list there. But if it doesn't have access to the code list as it is in the CRF, then it cannot derive it, unfortunately.
No. Okay. Yeah, so making use of an electronic CRF and also maybe a standard CRF would already help.
Yes, a lot.
Creating this Define-XML code list. Then just one question remaining. Are there certain requirements for the annotated CRF actually? So you mentioned that you're extracting the annotations from the CRF in the creation of the Define-XML. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about this? So are there certain requirements?
Yes, I don't have a CRF where I can showcase this right now, but very briefly, you need to have a file that's an XFDF file, and that's a specific file that will get all the annotations and comments that you have on your CRF, so on the PDF. To get it, I know Adobe Acrobat can create it very easily. It's exporting all the comments to an XFDF file. And once you have that file, then the program can take care of everything else. You can do it with 2 clicks. I'm just thinking if I do have a CRF where I could show this, but I think at the moment I do not. If we have time, I can go look for one.
Well, I think it's fine.
Okay.
That's indeed that you need to have some requirements that you need to save it as another file.
Yes, you do need it as an XFDF file. That's the requirement that the program has, but that's about it.
Yeah. Well, if the person would like to know more about it, then of course he or she can send us an email, and
yes.
then we can.
I will be very happy to show how to create one.
Yes. Well, there's another question. If the values of qval in a subdomain are all numeric, let's say 0 and 1, would you assign data type as integer for qval?
Yes. Yes, it will actually look for that. So I think right now it does. It is on my list because that now reminded me of something else. It is on my list, the option to decide if you have a character variable and that's qval, but that's also, for instance, auras. If all of your values are numeric, it's still a character variable, and you can decide if at variable level you want it to be text or if you want it to be integer or float, because then the program can decide which one it is. But I believe at this moment it will look at the values that you have there to decide what type it is. So even if you have just dates, it will give it a date time type.
Yes. Okay, that's clear.
It seems that there are no further questions. Let me end by saying that should you have any questions regarding our webinar, don't hesitate to contact us. Our contact details are on the screen. A PDF of this presentation will be distributed and a video recording of this webinar will be made available via our next newsletter. Thank you for attending this webinar and wish you all a very good day.